Hey guys, I thought I would talk about a topic I haven't even mentioned for a very long time. Talk about Kundalini and Jesus at the same time. Yeshua. His name was never Jesus. Jesus is a translation of the Greek, and the Greek changed it to Jesus to suit their numerology, so it would equate to the number 888, which represents the solar, the number of the sun in the sky. But let me just say, just off the back of that one sentence alone, and keep going through with our linear mind about these things. But a great man that many of you will know the words of said, "Life is like a slippery fish. The true experience of life is in catching it, in the slippery fish, and you're trying to catch this slippery fish and it goes all over the place. That's the vibrance of life, that's living. But what we find ourselves doing, because we speak in a straight line and the experience of life is anything but straight, we feel a need to throw a net over it. And when we throw the net over the slippery fish, we subdue it. And when we throw the net over it, we also end up with little squares where we can count the details of the slippery fish's experience. When you throw the net over the slippery fish, it's like casting your mind onto the details of life. And this is what people like Jesus were trying to show you. And I see an error in the way I've done things in the past, because people didn't understand. I was speaking about something that I have seen in the lives of many persons who know nothing about what I was speaking about. That is that separately from your concepts of God and belief, inside your body you have bioelectric energy. You also have certain levels of health based on fluids within you. You have endocrine gland system and all of the fluids involved in there. You have your lymphatic system, etc. And if you live righteously, now what we'll say by that is you're not overindulging in stimulus of the flesh. Thus you're not constantly burning up this precious balance within you, this precious biochemical balance of your body, by using alcohol or by pursuing sexual pleasure constantly. You have a certain level of energy then remaining within you, and that allows that essence of vibrance, to where we see someone with light in their eyes and this presentness and this, they come into a room and they light it up. We know these people, we all have them in our life. Then that life force, that collective expression of life force is high in them. It's up here, they're alert. And when you meet someone who's just lazy in front of the TV and constantly overeating, it's very heavy. We feel it, we see it, it's very and it can make people even depressed. And that's all that Kundalini ever was. That's all these gurus and sages were ever saying. But what I see is people are misunderstanding this, and they're trying to wake up this energy, this Kundalini, and somehow they think they can trick it and become like superhuman almost. And maybe there are certain parties on the planet who have sussed out how to trick and manipulate this, but for me, my only experience is, based on as a natural man most of the time, that the only way to stay elevated like that is to walk with temperance. And the best instructions I've seen for that are from Jesus. If you live as he asked, It's not forced. It's not forceful. And thus, if you are proclaiming Jesus as your Lord and Saviour, but you struggle to live as He asked, there's a disconnect somewhere, is my belief. Something's not right. And the thing that is not right, I think often, is we are bolting the concepts onto our existing life, our notion of self. I am John, I do this, I do that. Let's add on this new form of connection to God with Christianity. Let's bolt that onto who I already am. Instead of bringing all that I am down and giving it over and saying, hey, I'm yours, do what you want. Make use of my life as I once did. I went through that. And it doesn't mean that this sense of self won't regrow around you, because mine did, and I had a horrible battle with a horrible formation of ego, and I'll probably have that battle for the rest of my life. I've come to realise you'll never be free of it. But it seems to me that people, without the instructions of such a man, it seems to me that they feel they can just store that energy up. They can live light. But they can also get to a point where they don't judge anything as right or wrong. And that's lethal. And I see it regular in people who focus on Kundalini, they focus on self, and they focus on the idea that they become this extra efficient version of themselves, but there's no structure on the rules. The rules of how to use that life force is absent. And thus many persons will look after their health, look after their bodies, but just express hedonism. They won't express the ideals that I have come to adore about service to others, and the selflessness that is the expression of that story that Jesus lived. And it doesn't matter where you go. The other day someone wrote me, and I'm not picking on you, I know you'll be watching me, and he said, stop lying by making Jesus historical and not just myth. Now, it's funny because on the internet I've said at times a lot of the story is encoded into a mythological state. It doesn't mean the story never happened. It means it's pertaining a deeper truth about the human body. But the longer you go into this, the more you're throwing a net over something and counting the dots and the squares, I should say. You're not living, you're not catching the fish. You're not living it. And thus you have to ask, who's bringing Christ to the earth right now? And it's people from all walks of life. People from all backgrounds. People who believe in mystic Christianity. People who believe in literal Christianity. People who just believe in love are bringing exactly the embodiment of what Christ said to the planet. They're bringing that. And in the years that I've done this, I've had literal Christians say, you're doing this wrong. But I also have mystic Christians saying in this email, you're doing this wrong. But both are coming from the same space. Both are coming from throwing the net over it and standing by their squares that they've counted in the slippery fish. None are coming from the slippery fish. Because when you're coming from the slippery fish, you don't really have time to count the squares and to tell others to count them too. And this was a mistake I made, was I started correlating the provisions for the children with views on YouTube. And yeah, there's some truth in that. You know, obviously the exposure of certain videos, etc. brought a lot of help. And I still stand by my beliefs. I still know that I must look after that energy within me. That it's not enough for me to be an efficient man and to have the love coming out of me in the way that I want it to, unless I live by a certain set of rules for myself. And they are pretty much the rules that Jesus Christ left us. That is what I live by. But I also am aware of my internal workings, but I don't need to be aware of how a car works to drive it. But what I did was I spoke so much about the internal workings that I started getting bogged down in the squares of the net instead of the journey of the slippery fish. And I was always a slippery fish person. That's what God called me to do. He called me not to calculate and calculus and linearly explain everything. He called me as a sovereign being of his sovereign child. He called me to Africa to use every single part of myself to build, to love. And loving and building doesn't come naturally from the straight mind, from the linear. It comes from a collective space behind the adjectives that we stack up on top of each other to describe it. And with each adjective we add, we get further away from it. He came to ask me to catch the slippery fish, and he came to ask you to do the same. And I think the interesting thing for me is that some of us end up expressing so deeply the knowledge of throwing the net over it that we miss the experience, and we miss our own God-given manifestational power. But it's needed, because some people have had a net over life their whole life, and they need someone to break the net down. They need someone to unpick it bit by bit. So as all of a sudden, for a brief reprieve, they find themselves exhilarated by the wrestle with the wriggly fish. And staying free of the netting is where God can speak to you. But many of us, we have a brief embrace of that slippery fish moment. And then we start trying to tell others about it, as I did. And to do it, it's indescribable. A mere human can't describe the eternal. And thus we throw a net over it. And we start attaching to this square says this, and this square says that. And we miss it when we do that. We miss where it is. And thus, as I say, I stand by. For all the word Kundalini, it's a dreadful thing. People say it's a spirit and all of this. My staunch experience is that this energy flowing through my body is separate from God. God is there, He loves me no matter what. No matter what, He forgives me. But there are laws here. And to function at my very best, I have to preserve the energy within my body and not live riotously and burn it up. Not let lust burn me up. Not let gluttony burn me up. And that's something the Bible tells you over and over. But in trying to explain that to people, if it doesn't open the door to that reprieve where you're like, okay, that's this section, that's this section, and all of a sudden, boom, you're free. You're living, you're fighting, you're wrestling with this thing that is life, and your linear system can't even begin to describe it. If that's not happening, I'm wasting time for people. Because that's the truth of it. The wrestle with the slippery fish. And that's what Jesus was trying to lead you to. He's trying to show you not to get bogged down in your flesh. Because when you get bogged down in your flesh, you're enslaved to something. Be it food, be it a plant, be it a substance. be it a stimulant, be it internal self-creation of drugs, like the over-abuse of sex we see with pornography, etc. You're becoming enslaved. You miss the experience. Not sure that went the way I wanted it to, but that's what's in my heart anyway. It's hard. It's hard to assign linear language to feelings and emotions and connections that are anything but linear. That's why I often wonder whether I should even bother trying at all. Just tell people to breathe. Because the more I lure you into the linear, the more risk I have of you attaching to the linear identity of the mind. When I'm trying really to use my words to bring you to something words can't describe. God bless.